The average person working a full-time job in Canada's most expensive cities takes home enough money to cover rent, and not a lot else. Canada is the second largest country in the world, and the cost of living across it varies enormously. In some parts of the country, a reasonable salary goes a long way. In others, that same salary disappears before the end of the month. The cities here fall firmly into the second category. Several rank among the most expensive places to live anywhere in the world, competing with London, New York, and Sydney for the distinction of making ordinary life financially punishing. We'll start with Calgary, which surprises people more than it probably should. Calgary sits in the interior of Alberta, far from the coastal markets that dominate these conversations. And that geographic distance has a way of making people assume it operates in a different price category. It does not. A one-bedroom apartment in Calgary's inner city now averages somewhere between $1,700 and $2,000 per month, and that number has been climbing steadily for several years. The average home price in the city sits above $550,000, with detached houses in desirable neighborhoods pushing well past $700,000. For a landlocked prairie city without a coastline or a mountain backdrop, those are significant numbers. The engine behind Calgary's costs is oil and gas. Alberta's energy sector has historically pushed wages higher than in most other Canadian cities, which sounds like good news until those wages drive up the cost of everything else alongside them. Groceries, services, and housing all respond to what workers in the energy sector are earning, and the result is a cost of living index that consistently ranks Calgary among the most expensive cities in the country. Alberta collects no provincial income tax, which is a genuine advantage and one of the reasons Calgary attracts so many people relocating from other provinces. But that tax benefit has a way of disappearing once rent, groceries, and transportation are factored into the monthly total. Calgary has also changed considerably since the oil boom years of the early 2000s. The city is larger, more densely populated, and more economically diversified than it once was. Tech, finance, and professional services have all grown as sectors, and with them has come a new layer of demand that has little to do with oil prices. The boom and bust reputation no longer fully captures what Calgary is. The taxes are low, but so is your disposable income once you've paid for everything else. Cross the Rockies to the coast, and Victoria is one of the most pleasant cities in the country to be priced out of. Situated on the southern tip of Vancouver Island, Victoria is consistently described as one of Canada's most livable cities. The climate is mild, the scenery is genuinely beautiful, and the housing market is, by most measures, completely disconnected from what local workers actually earn. The average home price in Victoria sits above $1 million. Rental vacancy rates have hovered below 1% in recent years, which is among the lowest in the country. That number matters because it removes negotiating power entirely. When vacancy is that tight, landlords do not compete for tenants. Tenants compete for units. A one-bedroom apartment now regularly exceeds $2,000 per month, and the median household income in the city does not stretch comfortably over that figure once groceries, transportation, and utilities are added in. Part of what drives this is geography. Victoria is on an island. Land is finite in a way that mainland cities are not, and that constraint puts a floor under prices that does not exist elsewhere. Beyond geography, demand has been pushed upward by two groups in particular: retirees drawn by the mild winters and relatively relaxed pace, and remote workers who relocated during and after the pandemic and brought larger budgets with them. Both groups can afford to pay more than someone employed locally in healthcare, education, or retail. The result is a city that presents one face to visitors and a different one to the people who live and work there full-time. Victoria's reputation as a quiet, manageable, beautifully situated city is accurate. What that reputation does not advertise is the rental market, the years-long waiting lists for subsidized housing, or how far outside the city center a local salary will actually take you. The cherry blossoms are beautiful in spring, which is something to think about while you're calculating whether you can afford a one-bedroom on a local salary. A few hundred kilometers inland, Kelowna pulled off something harder to explain. a wine country resort town in the BC interior, somehow became one of the most expensive places to buy a home in Canada. For a long time, Kelowna was the kind of place people pointed to when they wanted proof that affordable, livable cities still existed in British Columbia. The Okanagan Valley, warm summers, vineyards, lake access, skiing within driving distance. It had a reputation as a slower, cheaper alternative to the coast. That reputation is now essentially gone. The average home price in Kelowna has climbed well past $1 million, putting it in the same conversation as cities several times its size. What drove that shift was migration. When homeowners in Vancouver and Toronto decided to cash out during the pandemic years, many of them landed in Kelowna. They arrived with equity from markets that had been appreciating for decades, and they paid prices that local wages had never been expected to support. A family that sold a modest Vancouver home and bought in Kelowna without a mortgage was competing against a local buyer who needed financing at a price that was already out of reach. The local economy runs largely on agriculture, tourism, and hospitality. Those industries do not produce salaries that keep pace with a housing market reshaped by coastal capital. The appeal of the city is real. The lake is beautiful, the wine region draws visitors from across the country, and the outdoor lifestyle is not a marketing invention. But the people who work in the restaurants and the vineyards and the ski lodges are not buying homes in the city they work in. Kelowna grew quickly, and its infrastructure and amenities still reflect a mid-sized regional centre, even as its real estate market started behaving like something else entirely. It is a place people moved to because they couldn't afford Vancouver, which tells you everything about what happened to prices once they arrived. Across the country, Canada's capital has spent years being politely ignored in conversations about expensive cities, while quietly becoming very, very expensive. Ottawa does not have the cultural gravitational pull of Montreal or the financial skyline of Toronto. It has Parliament Hill, the Rideau Canal, and one of the most stable employment bases in the country. That stability has consequences. It means there is always demand for housing in the city, and that demand has been pushing prices upward for the better part of a decade without the dramatic headlines that Vancouver and Toronto attract. The average home price in Ottawa has roughly doubled over the past 10 years. A detached home in a reasonable neighbourhood now regularly clears the $1 million mark. That was unthinkable not long ago for a city with Ottawa's reputation as a steady, moderately priced alternative to its more glamorous counterparts. Rental costs have followed the same trajectory. A one-bedroom apartment in a central neighbourhood now runs well above $2,000 per month, with no particular sign of softening. The vacancy rate has remained stubbornly low, partly because the public sector keeps drawing professionals into the city, and partly because the bilingual requirement for many federal positions narrows the talent pool and concentrates it here. That bilingual dynamic shapes the housing market in specific ways. Ottawa is one of the few cities in the country where English and French fluency opens specific career doors, and those careers tend to pay well. Lawyers, policy analysts, translators, consultants, and contractors cycle through the federal government in large numbers, earning salaries that support higher rents and higher home prices over time. The canal is beautiful in the warmer months and becomes the planet's biggest ice skating destination in winter. But the city's identity as a calm administrative capital has obscured how hard the housing market has become for anyone arriving without equity already in hand. It is the kind of city where federal salaries look generous until you try to buy a house within an hour of downtown. 3 hours west of Ottawa, Toronto needs no introduction in any conversation about expensive Canadian real estate. Toronto is the largest city in Canada, the financial capital of the country, and one of the most expensive rental markets on the entire continent. A one-bedroom apartment in the downtown core runs north of $2,500 a month. That is not a luxury unit. That is a standard one-bedroom in a reasonably central location. The median household income in Toronto sits somewhere around $85,000 a year before tax. That sounds reasonable until you do the math on what housing alone is consuming. Average home prices in the city proper have crossed the $1 million threshold and held there. Detached houses in established neighborhoods regularly sell for considerably more than that. often well above asking. In bidding wars that have become so routine, they are no longer considered unusual. The condo market was supposed to be the answer to this. For years, condos were positioned as the accessible entry point into Toronto ownership for people who could not compete for detached homes. That window has largely closed. Average condo prices in the city have climbed past $700,000. Carrying costs on a unit at that price, with a standard mortgage and condo fees, frequently exceed what renting the equivalent space would cost. What keeps demand from softening is the same thing that has always defined Toronto. It draws people. It draws them from across Canada, from the United States, and from countries around the world. The city is home to over 200 distinct ethnic communities. It is where the major banks are headquartered, where the largest film and media industry east of Vancouver operates, and where immigration pathways converge with economic opportunity in a way that no other Canadian city quite replicates. People arrive and need somewhere to live. The supply of housing has not kept pace with that arrival for a very long time. Toronto has more people wanting to live there than it will ever be able to house at a price most of them can actually afford. That gap has been widening for 20 years. Back in British Columbia, Whistler is a different kind of expensive. The cost of living here has almost no relationship to the wages being paid to the people who keep the place running. Most cities on this list are expensive because of job markets, population density, and demand from workers who need to be close to employment. Whistler is different. The price of property here is driven by something else entirely: the global appeal of one of the most celebrated ski destinations on the planet, and the willingness of wealthy buyers to pay almost anything to own a piece of it. Average home prices in Whistler are among the highest in British Columbia. A detached home regularly sells for well above $2 million. The buyers are not, for the most part, ski instructors, or lift operators, or restaurant workers. They are investors and vacation property owners purchasing a second or third home in a place with international name recognition. The result is a town where asset values are set by a global market, but wages are set by a local resort economy. Those two things do not reconcile. Workers at the resort frequently cannot afford to live in the municipality where they are employed. Staff housing has become a documented crisis, with resort operators scrambling to provide accommodation because the open rental market is simply inaccessible on an hourly wage. Shared rooms and crowded worker housing units are not unusual. They are standard. Whistler functions as its own enclosed economic ecosystem, where the spectacular mountain scenery and the operational workforce exist in almost entirely separate financial realities. The skiing is world-class, and somewhere on the mountain, there is a very good chance your lift operator is sleeping 4 to a room to afford to be there. 2 hours south of Whistler, the costs do not ease up. Burnaby sits directly east of Vancouver and is, for most practical purposes, simply more Vancouver, with all the costs that implies. It is the kind of city that gets folded into conversations about Metro Vancouver and then quietly overlooked, as though being part of the same metropolitan area excuses it from having its own staggering numbers. It does not. The average detached home in Burnaby sits well above $1.5 million. For a city that most people outside British Columbia still think of as a suburb, that figure takes some adjustment. What happened to Burnaby over the past 2 decades is a familiar story in the Vancouver region. Buyers who were priced out of Vancouver proper moved east and brought their budgets with them. Demand shifted, prices followed, and the gap between Burnaby and Vancouver narrowed considerably. At the same time, Burnaby stopped being a suburb in any meaningful sense. The skyline around Metrotown changed. Towers went up. Density increased. The city built out the kind of urban infrastructure, transit, commercial corridors, high-rise residential, that belongs to a major city, not a bedroom community. The tech and media industries accelerated that transformation. Burnaby is home to significant studio operations and has attracted large technology employers whose professional workforce earns well, competes for limited housing, and drives costs upward regardless of whether those employees consider themselves Vancouver residents or Burnaby ones. The distinction matters less than the demand they represent. rental costs have followed ownership prices in the same direction. A one-bedroom in Burnaby is not meaningfully cheaper than one across the city boundary. The market does not observe municipal lines. Burnaby has become its own city in every meaningful sense, and one of the things it has fully absorbed from its neighbour is the real estate market. Across Burrard Inlet from Burnaby, West Vancouver enters a different category entirely. The average detached home here regularly exceeds $3 million. That is not the ceiling, that is the floor. West Vancouver sits on the northern shore of Burrard Inlet, backed by the mountains of the North Shore Range and connected to the rest of British Columbia through Horseshoe Bay to the west. The waterfront properties along Marine Drive are among the most sought-after addresses in the country. The mountain backdrop is immediate and dramatic. It is, by almost any measure, a beautiful place to live. It is also one of the wealthiest municipalities in Canada. The median household income here sits well above the national average, and the demographics of the city reflect that consistently. West Vancouver has the highest concentration of residents in the top income brackets of any municipality in British Columbia. The people who live there are not typically people who saved for 20 years and stretched their budget. They are people who arrived with significant capital already in hand, whether through inheritance, business, investment, or the sale of property elsewhere that had itself appreciated enormously over decades. The practical consequence of those prices is that West Vancouver has become functionally inaccessible to anyone who does not already hold substantial wealth. A professional earning a strong salary in Vancouver cannot reasonably save toward a detached home in West Vancouver. The entry price is simply beyond what income-based saving can reach within a working lifetime. What this produces is a city that is less a housing market in the conventional sense, and more a concentration of existing wealth reinforcing itself over time. West Vancouver is not an expensive city. It is a wealthy one, and those are two different things, with different rules about who gets to participate. Right beside West Vancouver, the math gets different again. North Vancouver is hemmed in by mountains and water, and, as a result, by one of the tightest housing supplies in the country. The mountains rise sharply to the north. Burrard Inlet cuts off the south. The land available for development sits in a narrow band between those two realities, and that band has been filling up for decades. Average detached home prices in North Vancouver regularly exceed $1.8 million. The rental market offers little relief, with a one-bedroom apartment averaging well above $2,200 per month. Those numbers put North Vancouver in the same conversation as the cities already covered, which is remarkable given that most Canadians still think of it as a suburb rather than a city in its own right. What has driven costs here is partly geography and partly the specific kind of person North Vancouver attracts. Outdoors-oriented professionals, people who want to ski Seymour or grouse on a Tuesday evening and still be at a desk in Vancouver by 9 the next morning, have consistently been willing to pay a premium for that proximity. That premium has compounded over 20 years into something that now shuts out the workers who keep the city functional. The vacancy rate hovers near zero in most quarters. New supply is constrained not just by land, but by topography, and topography does not negotiate. There is no direction to build that does not run immediately into a mountain or a body of water. That geographic constraint is what separates North Vancouver from other expensive cities on this list. Ottawa is expensive because demand is high. North Vancouver is expensive because demand is high, and the physical capacity to respond to that demand is genuinely limited. The mountains are not going anywhere, the land supply is not expanding, and the prices reflect exactly that, which brings us finally to Vancouver itself. It has sat at the top of any conversation about Canadian housing costs for so long that it barely even registers as news anymore. The citywide benchmark home price sits above $1.2 million. In many neighborhoods, detached homes regularly exceed $2 million. The average one-bedroom apartment rents for more than $2,800 per month. These are not outlier figures pulled from the most expensive pockets of the city. These are the averages. The forces behind Vancouver's costs are well documented. Geography plays a significant role. The city is bounded by the Pacific Ocean to the west, mountains to the north, and the United States border to the south, which means the land available for development is finite in a way that most cities are not. That physical constraint has combined with decades of foreign investment, particularly from buyers in Asia, to push residential prices into territory that local incomes cannot realistically support. The provincial government introduced a foreign buyer tax in 2016, and prices adjusted briefly before continuing upward. The arrival of major technology firms and the expansion of the local tech sector brought higher salaries, which helped some buyers and raised the floor for everyone else. Vancouver also carries a global reputation as one of the most livable cities in the world, a designation it has held for years in various international rankings. That reputation functions as a permanent demand driver. People want to live there. The supply has not kept pace. The result is a market disconnected from local earning potential. The gap between prices and incomes has widened consistently over the past decade. The strain extends broadly across economic demographics, affecting everyone from recent graduates to established professionals. What that means in practice is difficult to overstate. A household earning the median Vancouver income spends a proportion of its take-home pay on housing that leaves very little for anything else. Workers with professional salaries, the kind that would allow comfortable home ownership in most Canadian cities, find themselves renting indefinitely in Vancouver. Some commute from Abbotsford, Langley, or Mission, travelling an hour or more each direction to access housing that is merely expensive rather than completely out of reach. The commuter towns surrounding Vancouver have themselves become expensive as that demand has spread outward. The condo market, long considered the entry point for first-time buyers, has followed detached home prices upward to a degree that has closed off that option for much of the population. Rental vacancy rates remain among the lowest in the country, which gives landlords pricing leverage that keeps rents elevated even as ownership becomes more distant as a possibility for most residents. 10 cities, 10 different stories. The through line connecting them is consistent. Almost none of these places became expensive because the people living there started earning dramatically more. They became expensive because money arrived from somewhere else, from coastal markets cashing out, from foreign investment, from second home buyers, from professional sectors whose salaries set a new floor the rest of the local economy can't match. Thank you for joining me on this look at Canada's most expensive cities. Whether you're calling one of these places home, dreaming of moving to one, or just trying to make sense of the numbers, I hope this gave you a clearer picture of what life on the ground actually looks like in each one. If you enjoyed this, hit subscribe so you never miss out on future explorations of the places, the people, and the stories that make Canada what it is.